Here we go. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Edmondson. I'm an assistant professor of theater history and dramaturgy here at UCF.
Hi, my name is Mia Strickland, and I'm a senior theater student here at UCF. Thank you for joining us today.
Our goal with these dramaturgy chats is to share with the greater UCF community some of the exciting learning opportunities and collaborations going on in our classrooms and theater departments. We're also here to support our ongoing season of play readings that amplify, empower, and illuminate diverse voices. This Saturday, actually, on October 24th, Theater UCF will live stream our final play in this series, James Imes's Kill Move Paradise, directed by UCF professor B. Boyd. In light of this powerful play, today's conversation focuses on dramaturgy's possible intersections with theater for social justice.
Before we get started, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our guest, Professor Holly McDonald, as well as a big thanks to Stephen Risco and Victoria Weston in marketing, Chloe and the UCF Dramaturgs, and the School of Performing Arts for their support. Just as a note, this session is being recorded. Later, it will be available on YouTube so you can share it with friends. If you enjoy this session, join us on Wednesday, November 4th for an open classroom discussion featuring guest professor Donatella Galella, who will be discussing her article, The Room Where It Happens, Hamilton, Obama, and Nationalist Neoliberal Multicultural Inclusion.
And now it is our great pleasure to introduce you to Professor Holly McDonald. Holly E. McDonald is a senior lecturer at UCF's School of Performing Arts, as well as a Women's and Gender Studies faculty affiliate. She holds an MFA from the University of Alabama and a BFA from West Virginia University. Prior to joining the theater faculty here, Holly worked in the Washington, D.C. area and abroad as a performer, director, and teaching artist. She currently works with undergraduate as well as graduate students. Course development and instruction of hers include, but are not limited to, theater for social change, diversity in theater, global theater, women in Western theater, queer theater, intermediate acting, and individual coaching. Holly earned a certificate from UCF's award-winning web-based training program and was the first UCF theater faculty member to develop and instruct a completely web-based theater courses. And as an advisor, I know that students rave about them. She is an ally member as well as a secular safe zone participant. Holly plans to continue activating, engaging, and empowering students to achieve their goals, develop their voices, and inspire change. Mia will start us off with our first question for Holly, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us for about 10-15 minutes, at which point we'll open up the discussion for questions from our friends here in the Zoom room with us.
Great. Holly, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to start off by telling us a bit about the classes you teach and your experience with dramaturgy?
Sure, Mia. Thank you so much. I just picked a few I had in my mind really that I think are the most relevant to our conversation. And so just a brief overview. I have a global theater, which is a sampling of various types of theater from around the globe. And we investigate works historically as well as culturally. Cultural diversity in theater, where we are interpreting and synthesizing, analyzing works, how they relate to different social challenges, and just exploring and unpacking those topics. So as some of you know, we look at things like Two Trains Running, Spider-Woman theater, African-American theater, August Wilson, Asian theater, women in theater, LGBTQ plus theater as well. And then theater for social change, which I think really is relevant to what we're doing now. And I'm so fortunate that I was assigned the class this semester, focusing on radical street performances, Wow's work, resource section, case studies, rallies, parades, performances, and just really looking at the historical, political, and cultural aspects and discovering the true world of the play and the playwright's intention. A little bit about my experience in dramaturgy. I would say starting in grad school with theater history, dramatic literature, script analysis, and then taking that work into, of course, different projects I worked on, and then UCF. I'm not sure if you know this, 18 years ago, I was also teaching not just at UCF, but at Daytona. I think it's called Daytona State College now. It used to be Daytona Community College, where I was teaching dramatic literature, script analysis, and theater history. And of course, as you well know, all of that really goes together in creating the whole world of the play and what we're going to do around that with audiences and community members. So really just embracing, trying to define that play structure, and stressing those political, historical, as well as the cultural aspects, and dealing with audience members. And I think that not just for the performer, but as a performer at heart, that's what my training in it is, my training is, and also remembering that connection with Stanislavski's Given Circumstances, and really keep coming back to that, asking the right questions, not only the questions, that particular time of the play and what the playwright was trying to say, but then what is the relevance of that work today? And how can we share that? And we were just talking about that, of course, before we got started, these older pieces, but they're still relevant. So really focusing on the beginnings with the text, the subtext, and knowing the issues relevant to today's even consumers of theater, even if you're not a practitioner of that.
Fantastic. So how do you think that dramaturgy can promote and enhance theater for social change? Or I feel like you sort of answered that a little bit in the sort of connections that you're drawing out, but what kinds of ways might that look?
I think that really it starts through contextualizing it, and not only for the creative team, but also for communities, audience members. And when I say communities, I just want to be clear, I'm talking beyond just audience members. What that has, the implications of that then going forward, and us being inspired and using this performance that we see as the impetus to move in other kinds of actions. So for events that may present ideas and concepts that are different from what we've experienced in our own culture or lived experience, also key to keep in mind the role of the dramaturg, which can change for those who don't know. I mean, change as much as each project. And so how Mia will connect this work and create dialogue like we're having now, but really overall always coming back and enhancing that performance or that event through this research.
Awesome. Well, sort of going off of that, how can dramaturgy enhance productions that already focus on social justice issues such as Kill Move Paradise?
Well, knowing the roots of the foundation, I mean, I guess the question would be, also the other question aside from that is, how would we be without this? And we couldn't exist without this work of the dramaturg and still be effective and relevant. Knowing that James Iams, from his interview with the National Black Theater in 2017, he grew this whole process out of his need to make sense of, or not even necessarily make sense of, but to metabolize his emotions when we're talking about the shootings in Charleston, South Carolina at the church. And, I was really, really touched by the interview. I watched it again the other day, and he said that he was trying with this work to search for peace and understanding. And I think in some sense, at least for me, I should speak for myself, in my search of understanding things, theater has always brought that to me. Just knowing that he's pulling from this history, current events, stressing this capacity of theater as a healing. And he even states, I like to consider the what if. And that's really exciting for me, because these are questions that we're asking all the time to enhance productions. We're saying, what if, what if this, what if that? And if we miss out on these details, I mean, where and what are we left with? And so this is the work done by the dramaturg, and really just gaining a full appreciation. You can't without that information, like the playwright provided for us. And how do we really get to that place? I think that that's where our dramaturg is key. You know, a lot of times I'll hear students come out, and I shouldn't just say students, shame on me, there are other people too. If a person comes out of a performance and they say, and we hear this, there are a few audience members who will say, well, that was stupid, or something like that. And so the question I try to ask is, was it stupid? Are you saying that you didn't understand it, it's not understandable, or it's of low quality? Let's really unpack that. And I think that the dramaturg can really help us unpack these ideas so that we're able to get out of a box if we're in there with thinking. And of course, we always have, just as being human, just being human, these preconceived notions and ideas of things. And so that really helps us unpack and process these things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The sort of idea that dramaturgy happens like before, during,
Mhm.
and after the actual event of the production, and that
Mhm.
sometimes the dramaturgical work is sort of post-production and helping people, like in talkbacks, understand things more deeply. That's really fabulous. Kind of thinking more in that same vein.
Mhm.
I know a lot of folks are going to stream Kill Move Paradise this weekend.
Mhm.
And since we've already read the play, we don't know what it'll be like in its performance form. But I wonder if we can start thinking and doing some dramaturgy right here, right now, about what are some sort of actions that we can take towards social justice that might make more sense after sort of viewing Kill Move Paradise. I wonder if you have any thoughts in terms of that.
I think that's perfect thing to point out. And absolutely, I mean, first and foremost is voting. Of course, we all know that, the power of the vote. And the second thing I would say is listening and engaging like we're doing now. And it doesn't matter if you have 5, 6 people or 500 or 600 people. And I find that true even when I attend rallies and they cover the streets of Orlando or Washington, D.C., or wherever that may be. If I'm connecting and I am engaging like I am here today, that's power. And of course, that changes for each of us. And then, of course, asking the right questions. And I really think that moves into something that I heard and was inspired by Dr. Angela Davis. And I have a tendency to do this. I'll get whipped up around an election or an event. But where am I before that? And that's what I'm going to challenge myself. Where am I before that? Am I asking people for their vote just during an election year when these things come to light? Or am I engaging in ways that are meaningful to build these relationships before? And so I think that this kind of work, the work that you're doing now and that Mia engages in and all of us, is really a building process. And finally, I would say 3 key points that I try to tell students, and really everyone I have these conversations with, is to ask yourself and to do this. First of all, learn something. I have to learn something because I don't know what I don't know, and making these assumptions can be really dangerous. And so I have to listen before I speak, and that's very hard. Because of course, for me personally, I'll speak for myself. A lot of times I think I know these things, but I don't. So listening. And so I would say number 1 is educate. The next one is agitate. And we do that by teaching something. And so I consider what we're doing now teaching each other, which is of great value. I'm going to take things from here and I'm going to digest it. And it's really going to change the way I see things. And then last, the action step. So I say, now that I've been learning things, I've been teaching things, and hopefully agitating and using this as the impetus to drive people into this last thing, which is the action step. And I think that this is the step that we really have to stress. I think there's a real misunderstanding when I say action step, that you think that you have to take on the world and change it. So the immediate response I receive normally is, I don't have time. I'm really overwhelmed. And I say, is there just one thing? An action step doesn't have to be huge. For instance, I just recently, number one, learned something. I read about literature that the NAACP sent me some facts I didn't know. Number two, teach something. Well, I was engaged in dialogue with someone I was having a phone conversation with, and I said, did you know this? Did you know this? I didn't know that. And then my action step this week that, and you have to pick one, you have to do that. My action step is small. I have a lot of grading to do. And so what do? I'm not going to ditch it and say, I don't have time. I'm going to say my action step will be to renew my membership with them this week. And I think that while that may seem really, really small, I think it's a very big thing if we can all shift our thinking.
Thank you. And I think that the dramaturgs for Kill Move Paradise did a really good job of that. And I know in their note, they have resources for active allyship and a lot of resources for Black healing. And I think that they really did a good job and have done a lot of the work for us. So we can go home from the show while we're watching it at home, but we can see the show and we can do something afterwards.
Excellent, excellent points, Mia. That's exactly it. Without breaking it down, I think that most of us already do this. Most of us engaged in this type of work, we do this. We just don't necessarily, break it down and say this is the way it's unfolding. Those are excellent examples. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, they did a really, really good job. So our next question is, how do you think your classes can benefit dramaturgs?
I would say really in providing this sort of framework that sets people up to understand the importance of. And so what I mean is showing them the major role that this type of research plays in getting to that point. And so for me, it's really about stressing the journey. And I want them to also see connections. And the way, I guess, let me back up. The most exciting thing for me in the class is having the students take on this role of dramaturg. And that means they have to go out, and I can give a list of plays, and I do give these examples throughout, but I ask students a lot of times to choose their own. And you would be surprised how that challenge is huge, And I can say, look at the Laramie Project, look at the Heights, look at For Colored Girls, look at Stop Kiss, look at Sweat, look at A Raisin in the Sun. But when you take something that is really relevant to you, that is an issue in your community, and you grasp that, I think there's more of an investment. And so I think that's how the class really assists in saying, here, I challenge you, go out and bring this back and let's share it. And I want to, that's a tough question for me, because when you're dealing with something that's asynchronous, that's another layer. But I still think we can do that. And I think we can do that by not just providing examples, but in the class, challenging students to bring things in as well. I have a lot of posts that are based on opinions about students finding photographs, about students creating interviews. In diversity, in my theater diversity course, I ask students not just to do play reading, but also to do an interview. And my hope is that they will see that an interview I consider is similar to the work of the dramaturg, reaching out and extending yourself and saying, how do these ideas connect, and how do people see this who have experienced life through a different lens?
That's really beautiful. I love that. I think actually we could start opening up to our other friends in the room. I have other questions that I'm always keen to ask, but is there any questions on the tip of anyone else's tongue that we want to sort of bring up for Holly?
I also wanted to throw out there while you're thinking, that, you know, we've been discussing new work, and that's always so exciting. I think this is applicable too to, you know, even older works. And I mean, I know this is from 2017. I don't really consider that old. But even, you know, much older works, I think, have the possibility to generate real conversation and dialogue. What popped into my head is, I can't think of it. Maybe you guys can help me. There is a rap song, and a line in this rap song goes, and I'm not a singer. It says, like OJ and isotoners, don't act like I never told you. And I thought of that because my daughter, she said, isn't that silly? What does that mean? OJ and isotoners. And of course, this is before her time, or before she was born. I was in grad school at the University of Alabama. And I said, well, it's not silly at all. In fact, you know, OJ had to try on the very popular glove at the time, isotoners, to see if it fit. And if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And it was I liked it because it was very dramatic, but that was in a song that it's very much present day. And if you dig into that, just think if songs, you know, were placed in the framework of how we discover the world of plays. And if we did that with music, you know, there's an entire history lesson there. I know it's a bit silly, but just in making the point that you can pull out of there and start to really have an entire discussion with things that are still relevant to today.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's actually a really interesting bridge with what Imes is doing in Kill Move Paradise, especially when he has this brilliant paragraph in which he describes like a room of paradise. And it's
Yes.
it's littered with, I don't know if there's an OJ reference. By the way, that's a Kanye song. You totally
okay.
have, you totally have a teenage daughter, I can tell.
Okay.
But yes, it's sort of like it's got all these references, including a bunch of musical references, which, like, you know, is Biggie is in there, Tupac is in there.
Gosh, I didn't even think of that. That
Yeah.
is the perfect example for this piece. He even mentions, I was thinking when I was reading it, he mentions, I don't know the exact line, but it says something about Kunta Kinte's toes. And I said to myself, I wonder how many people have seen or read Roots to understand that he's talking about actually, you know, the character who tries to run and then has his toes chopped off, you know. And there's so many of those moments in there that are so rich with history that really bring up these images as I was reading it. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Chloe. That was one of the strongest moments. And then at the end, I really had to revisit. I haven't read the Bible in years. I grew up Episcopalian. And at the very end, I can't remember the line, but it's from John, and I don't remember the exact piece of scripture, but I know it's from, I believe, John. I don't know. But he mentions, what is here at the end? And I thought to myself, gosh, I really have to go back over that to get a full understanding. Oh, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. And that's at the end, and it's repeated. And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, let me really look at that and just digest that and take it in. Yeah.
It's a really dense play in terms of references. Sage and Caroline, the dramaturgs for the production, had a lot of work cut out for them in terms of defining terms and making those connections for the cast, because, you know, I think sometimes it's easy to, if one is working on a show and doesn't know a reference, it can, our lives are so busy, right? And this play feels so dense and almost hyper textual that that we can sort of put off doing our research. And what Caroline and Sage have done is really go deep into exploring these multiple meanings, which is really cool. And they do it sort of in words, but they also do it visually as well. So I'm glad that you also liked that scene that describes the room. I also wonder, we've been talking a little bit around the idea of healing and this idea of like paradise, and it's almost unfathomable right now because it's just does not, I mean, for me personally, I can only speak for myself, I don't feel like I'm living in a paradise right now. And I just wonder, paradise is complicated in this play, and I think in the Christian religion it's a complicated idea as well. Only some people have access to it according to certain Christian doctrines, and I just wonder if we can talk a little bit more about this idea of paradise and sort of what it means in this play and where you've seen it in other plays.
Sure. In this play, well, what do I think it means in this play? I think that really, for me, it's left up to us to really decide what is that paradise, because, there are points where these characters are trying to make sense of this. Why are we here? And the images coming up, especially with the youngest character, talking about, playing this aliens and playing in a park and what children do. And that sense of innocence that is that comes crashing down. And so really trying to make sense of this in between. And then when they receive the manual, taking them sort of through these steps and just striving to get to that point, it kind of, and I think we have to look at this individually. It kind of, for me, makes me think of my struggle. And I am one, and I'll just be honest here, I do cherry pick among the religions. Someone once said, well, you should have your own if you don't like all of one, but whatever, that's another conversation. But right now, I'm really looking at Buddhism, and that's where I am in working on just a journey on trying to become, the best that person that I can be. And I like the idea of creating your own paradise, and so if I'm in hell, it's because I'm creating that now, and I'm embracing anger and I'm embracing sadness, but I could create this beauty in my life if I would embrace that. And so for me, this particular piece, I think I enjoyed it so much because I see them in that moment before when there's the flash and everything, and they move on to their final destination, which I think it suggests to us is really grand because of the light almost that becomes of that. I think that really that speaks to, I think it can speak to many because it doesn't put it in a box just for some. Does that make sense? And so as a Buddhist, as a Christian, or whatever you embrace, even if you're a pagan or whatever that may be, just thinking in terms of what that means to you. And so while the dramaturg, I think, can kind of guide us in understanding things, I think this is one of these things that we search for on our own.
I love that idea of the dramaturg sort of encouraging audience members to look inward. Any questions, Sybil or Mark or Madison, that have been coming up?
One thing that I'll say, I've taken, I think, 4 of Holly's classes, and I've taken Chloe's theater history classes. And one thing that I've realized while working as a dramaturg for Much Ado About Nothing is how much dramaturgy I was doing in these classes. Like these discussion posts about plays, like that's collective dramaturgy, replying to other students' thoughts and going, oh, I didn't even think about that. And like just talking through this stuff, that's dramaturgy. And I think that that's helped me so much in my own dramaturgy for Much Ado About Nothing, and like contextualizing and knowing all of the history and the context of all of these artists and the time periods and things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mia. I'm so glad that, some of these exercises have helped, especially like you said, engaging and post and commenting on the plays and really being able to see. I know that one of the goals I have with the courses is to shift more. And it's always been a fine line for me. I'd like to talk to students more and get their opinion on this. I'm always wondering, do I make this private information that I grade, or can we really share this with the whole class through discussion and discussion-based posts? And I want to lean more into discussion-based posts so that we can start to learn from each other at the same time. I always like to be careful, because I know there's a lot that some people want to say, but not necessarily to an entire group. So just trying to find that balance. And I think really students are going to help me do that, Yeah.
This isn't really a question, just kind of a comment. But Holly, you said earlier, this idea of I don't know what I don't know. And I talk to my students a lot about don't believe everything you think. And how we might, both of us teach theater for social change, but in a completely different lenses almost. Like mine is it's technique based, and we're we're physically moving. And then there's this wonderful kind of companion piece of the cerebral applications. And I'm wondering, dramaturgically, how we might move or share this idea of dramaturgy as a cerebral experience into dramaturgy as a physical collective experience. And that's not necessarily even for you to answer, Holly, but for us to marinate on.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something I would have to think about. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot to unpack, and we should. I think that, I'm going to leave today saying, yeah, let me process this. It does take a lot of processing, doesn't it?
Absolutely, especially, when something like theater is put into an institution, an academic institution, a lot of these, to use Sybil's language, cerebral sort of aspects of practice are almost obligatory. Like we have to do these things, but actually, we can sort of refigure them in our minds as like theory meeting practice, and I really see dramaturgy being there to sort of bridge the gap between theory and practice, or sometimes mitigate some tension between theory and practice, right? This sort of almost like the critic versus the artist. It doesn't have to be a versus. It could be sort of a collaborative process. And I think that's a really provocative question that you've brought up, and I love thinking about it and the sort of possibilities that it could mean for our department and dramaturgs in general.
You're not the first person to call me provocative.
Wow. And it really ties into thinking then about how this has been, these issues have been taken and processed in the past. If you think about Boal's work, and creating that, it's just huge to me thinking about him creating this whole spec actor, instead of just watching, we then get to engage in these scenes of discovering how we can deal with oppression. And so that's really exciting work, I think, to tie in as well.
And then taking that back from kind of the common person to the legislature as a form of theater to help people not only process what they're missing in their lives governmentally, but to help the government understand where they're falling down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And things just keep rushing into my head, which I love as you're speaking, Sybil. I was just having a conversation about, modern tragedy versus traditional tragedy. And yeah, we are tragic figures, now, and we can be. We don't have to be larger than life, kings and gods, as in Oedipus. We have our very own death of a salesman and things like that, and just seeing the comparison that very different times and how people are viewed as larger than life, and then moving that to the here and now and how we process that in our shoes and what we're doing in our communities. Yeah.
I like that you use this phrase larger than life, because it makes me think about the genre of Kill Move Paradise, because it's it's set in a no place, or a paradise place, or like you said, sort of open to your interpretation of the where of the play. It's definitely not realism. And I think, like, despite it being not a piece of realism, it's quite accurately sort of reflecting the real world. And I think it's an example of, like, how sometimes realistic plays aren't the best actually at sort of showing us who we are and where we are. So I wonder if you have any thoughts just about sort of genre in general. It's something I think about a lot as a theater history professor who's always trying to sort of narrate where realism came from and where romanticism came from. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about the genre of this play, and maybe if it echoes genres of other play of your sort of favorite works.
Well, for me with this one, it is because it has things that clearly it is not dealing in, and I think that he notes this too, forgive me if I'm wrong, that he makes a note about, this isn't realism, so don't shoot for that. I believe that was in the notes. And really, I can buy into that, and I want that, because while I need seeds of truth to anchor me in terms of what is relevant, I also need that space to allow myself. And this is where I go back to what he was saying in the interview, where we ask what if. And I think that's the point that we can start to use our imaginations and our creativity, and as artists then put our I've heard Sybil use this phrase before, magic sauce on it. And so that's the part for me that's most exciting, that I have this truth and I have this structure and I have these issues, but then there's that space for me to appreciate all of you and what you're contributing, and for me to also have this sort of imagination, this what if on top of that, as I watch it, this sort of anything is possible here, or is it? And I think that the limits are only set by my imagination. I can go there and I can experience that final scene perhaps in a way that you've never imagined, and you can do the same. And so I think that pieces that allow for that have a lot of power, at least for me personally, when I watch them. Those are the most powerful types of performances. Did that answer the question?
Definitely.
Okay.
I am I'm marinating in it and sort of feeling hopeful. It's giving me hope feelings. Just because of this idea of imagination and the ability to imagine a different and better world, especially in this play for Black Americans, where realism is just not. I mean, there isn't realism in this play. There's just the real. There's just the names of people who have lost their lives because of police brutality. And Imes actually says to sort of keep adding names as this play evolves. So the list that exists in the sort of original 2017 play only grows, and it's this kind of horrible monster that keeps feeding itself. But then when you look at the genre of the play, like you suggest, as something that imagines another world, that that just feels, it's complicated. It just feels complicated, but hopeful and devastatingly sad at the same time.
Absolutely. That list is it is so powerful. I think it takes up a couple pages. And of course, we know that that is just minimal. Those are the names that we see thrust out there in media that really have hit us the hardest. But knowing that that list continues to grow, I think that that's a part of the piece that's very much real, like you said. And then there has to be more, at least for me, that goes beyond that, or I'm left, I don't know. I guess I always go back maybe to the idea. I really am a fan of that line. And I know this is a movie, but I'm such a fan that, fear can hold us prisoner and hope can set us free. And I think that's why I like Shawshank Redemption so much. This idea of course, these are the really real circumstances, but beyond that, we can hope and we can dream. And sometimes that does pay off. And so hopefully that will be the impetus and keeping us moving forward.
They don't talk about it a lot, but Pandora's box, which of course unleashed this, host of illnesses upon the world. What they don't talk about is that there was one thing left in the box, and that was hope.
That's beautiful.
That's exactly what you're talking about.
Beautiful. I love that.
So to return to your action items, I think we should all go out there this week and learn something, teach something, and do something. I know that voting is a great thing to do. If you haven't done your thing of the week, I did my voting, but I feel challenged now by y'all to sort of think about other things that I can do, and maybe I'll start with some of the resources that are on the Dramaturgs website about what are some causes to devote my time or money to, because that's really the whole point, I think, for me about all this is what can we do, and through doing there is hope.
I love it. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Chloe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any final thoughts or questions? They don't have to be questions. They can just be thoughts from our other folks.
One thing that I
think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
One thing that I've been thinking about is Chloe and I met with Emily Freeman from Orlando Rep on Monday and talked about TYA and dramaturgy. And I've been thinking about that and Theater for Social Change and dramaturgy while you've been talking, and just about how when we were talking about realism, a lot of the TYA shows aren't realism. Things like Shrek can kind of seem like silly, but like those things are teaching these kids about being a good person, about being compassionate, and teaching them about the world. And in a way, our Theater for Social Change, even though they're silly and they're whimsical, and I think that is just an interesting thing to think about when talking about genre and Theater for Social Change, and how TYA is seen as silly or whatnot.
Mia, I will share with you that I actually created the MFA in Theater for Young Audiences here many years ago. Many loving hands have molded it since then, but it has always been my contention that all good children theater for young audiences is theater for social change.
I didn't know that. That's so cool. But yeah, I think so. And I think that, I don't know, I just, talking about realism made me think about it, just the way that it can be whimsical, or it can be fictional, or it can be fairies. And it's still, if it's successful, it's teaching these kids about being a good person and about doing good in the world, and about the things that are bad, but how you can do your part and how you can still be a compassionate person, I guess.
It's a perfect example, Mia, when you're talking about genre. I mean, it's a perfect example of knowing your community, knowing your audience, knowing what is relevant and appropriate to that audience to really create, the change that you want to see. I mean, absolutely, I mean, we see that all the time, though, with things that keep coming back to us. And I always ask this question. I say, why this particular piece? Why do we see it so much and do it so much? For instance, Romeo and Juliet, you know, why do we keep coming back to this? Well, we're always asking about love and trying to define love. And I think that it holds true. And then how do we take that from the time it was produced and make that relevant today? You know, I don't know. You know, is it about Democrat and Republican? Is it an issue of maybe ageism, and you change it up that way and still trying to be true to the playwright, but yet, of course, give it a meaning and impact to today's audience? And I think that theater for young audiences, Mia, is a perfect example of what you're sharing right now, of doing that, knowing that audience and embracing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what Chloe and I talked with Emily about on Monday was their production Vote right now, and it's teaching students the importance of voting and all the people that made voting possible and gave us the rights that we do have now, and all of the history and the context that has existed before just going down to vote now or registering for a mail ballot and whatnot. And I think that it's just there's so much that can be taught in TYA that's changing the world of the future.
Absolutely. Not only that, but just imagine, if you will, the conversation then the family has. And then that I like to think, I know maybe some people would say it's a stretch, but I don't believe that. I think that children see things and they ask questions about things. And I know, Sybil, with your recent talk to the Honors College, one of the things I really liked Sybil mentioned was how many questions children ask compared to what we do. And I thought, yeah, wouldn't that be great if we could try to take that up again, just asking questions all the time. And then from that, you know, the answers and then the dialogue and the connections. I mean, I think it's larger than what we give it credit for, you know.
Question asking is actually a creative process. It's a creative activity.
Mm-hmm.
And we children ask about 100 to 300 questions a day. Adults ask about 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're made to feel ashamed for asking those, or we self-impose the shame.
Yeah.
So ask more questions.
Yeah.
I've stopped apologizing for it.
I'm going to challenge myself. I am. You're right. It's hard to ask questions, especially if you're thinking that you're the only person that doesn't know. It comes with a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, questions and shame, adult shame, can sort of be unfortunately linked. And I think that a internet culture of wanting to appear expert is, you know, maybe, to take a pessimistic view, working against that inquisitiveness and working more towards this polarization. So I think it's quite fitting that we're sort of coming back around to children, because, you know, what sort of got us on this track was the idea of hope, and you know, these questions and this sort of stripped down version of humanity is, I think, such a powerful thing to sort of return to when things are feeling a little polarized.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Not to mention the excitement of learning. I mean, gosh, Mia, TYA was such a perfect example. I mean, you know, the excitement of children learning something for the first time and taking that out into the world. And isn't that really, if you think about it, a lot of this work based on, or at least for me, I should speak for myself, my joy I take from play. And I have always taken that, the joy of playing, I have found in the theater. And so that's huge. People will say to me, well, you don't look like a woman in your 50s. You don't act like a woman in your 50s. I don't know how that's supposed to be, but, you know, I guess I attribute some of it, if I were going to respond to such a question, a lot of it has to do with play and keeping that curiosity in the play. Yeah.
I see play as a form of research. and I integrate it into my classes. And it turns out play actually improves brain functionality. And it creates endorphins, which are the feel-good chemicals, and it creates community, which is essential to us as social creatures. We should never stop playing. Play, ask questions, make mistakes. We were talking earlier about being afraid of making mistakes. And part of my creativity keynote I just gave, so it's fresh for me, was that Thomas Edison is famous for saying, I make more mistakes than anybody I know. And eventually I patent them. So this idea of embracing mistake making is a necessary part of the learning process, that the great discoveries happen in the mistakes. I'm not sure how on topic that is, but.
Well, I was just thinking about that in terms of dramaturgy, because I think there's this myth that the dramaturg is like the expert in the room. But that's nobody can be that really, unless you're like a computer. And it's, it's not.
I tell my students that they don't make at least 12 mistakes a week, I'm out of a job.
Exactly. And so I think it's, reframing it, because that's a tall order, especially for student dramaturgs, because we're here to learn, not to be experts. And I'm even here to learn as your professor. So if I'm not here as an expert, then who is? Well, nobody. And I think reframing the role of dramaturg, especially when you have white dramaturgs working on plays written by Black playwrights and about sort of Black issues, the only appropriate and useful choice is to listen, I think, as dramaturgs, because we're just not the experts, or white people. I'm speaking on behalf of white women, but especially with those complicated roles at play, the sort of role of dramaturg as listener and as question inquirer, question asker, I think it's such a more liberating and open way of approaching a play like this, or a TYA play, or any play, and it's less pressure than being an expert.
I agree, Chloe. I think that's so valuable. I'm so glad that you pointed it out, that a lot of it is journey. And so, not necessarily you have to be this person to take this journey, but just be a person that's willing to listen outside of the scope of normally what you have going on in your life. And so if you're able to listen and take it on as a journey, for me personally, I'm really comfortable with that.
Listen to understand as opposed to listen to respond.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Gorgeous ideas in here.
Yeah.
Just amazing. I wonder if there's any other thoughts that anyone wants to throw into the Zoom room before we go our separate ways. This has been just such a lovely conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and we've let it just sort of take shape and form in front of our eyes, and those are my favorite kinds of chats. So thank y'all for sort of trusting the space and diving in.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you. I'm so grateful. And again, when I leave here, this is so valuable. I'll start going over and processing things that each of you have brought to the table. And of course, that shapes me on my journey, in teaching, not only in teaching, but as an artist, just processing everything I hear today, rethinking and saying, what can I do more? And you guys know what I'm talking about in this process, how this impacts you. So thank you for the opportunity. I really am grateful. This has been wonderful.
And thank you, Chloe and Mia, I believe, for putting this together. And
Yes.
Thank you, Holly, for sharing your magnificence.
Thank you. Thanks, Sybil. Thank you, Mia and Chloe. And thank you for attending, Madison, and my baby brother, who is not going to show his face.
You know it by heart.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone.
Awesome, y'all. Thank you so much. And we'll have more of these events. I'll let you know via the listserv and on Facebook and things like that. But when a recording is available on YouTube, I'll make sure to send it out so you can share with friends.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chloe.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.